thank you for coming in and sitting down with us for a little bit today. Of course, we're going to talk about the mayor's race. Tell me how you think things are going so far.
I don't really have a big opinion about where I stand in the race versus my opponent. I think things are going okay, though. I mean, getting some good feedback from folks that have come out to listen to some talks that we've given, and I'm getting good feedback from folks on the street. But one way or the other, voters are going to vote, and life goes on, and we'll do the best we can in the meantime.
So as people are coming and talking to you, what are some of the issues that they're really bringing to you that they're concerned about?
I really haven't heard as many concerns from people as I have encouragement from folks saying, you're the first mayor, this is the first council in a long time or in recent memory that are actually doing things and getting some things accomplished. I am hearing from people sometimes who are saying, I don't necessarily agree with everything that you've done, but I do agree with the fact that we need to move forward and accomplish some things and get things done. So I think there's a sense of momentum or a sense of a little bit of a change in the air. I don't want to overstate that or certainly not take it for granted because I know things can change again. But I'm encouraged by that. As far as concerns, I think the concerns that I'm hearing when I'm speaking to groups had to do with growth, had to do with water availability. I'm hearing a lot about water availability. Honestly, haven't heard a lot of specific concern about any particular initiative that the council's undertaken, like downtown or the river trail. I'm not getting a lot of pushback on that, and I guess I would expect that because people understand that that's where we're coming from, and probably don't feel the need to push back against. I'm not hearing that. So I'm hearing more about basic infrastructure, water, growth, general direction of the city.
When I've said through the forum, it seems like one of the biggest distinctions between you and your opponent has been the philosophy of how to spend for the sales tax funds. Talk to us a little bit about your ideas about how that should be going forward, what the priorities should be.
Well, there is a philosophical difference, but I would say it's bigger than that. When I became mayor and prior to becoming mayor and thinking about what issues would confront the council, one of the issues that I identified was the fact that our 4B money was not being allocated according to any set of goals or vision. So we were looking at individual funding deals and deciding whether or not to fund them based on their own merits, but without really thinking about how a string of funding agreements or a string of strategic investments could achieve a set of goals and in a direction for the community. So the first thing that I posed to the council and to EIC members was, where are we headed? What's important for the community? What are the risks that we face down the road? And can we start looking at a 20-year vision? Not that we can plan for 20 years effectively, but say, where is the community going to be in 20 years? And what are the steps that we can take now to position ourselves effectively? And so out of that conversation came the idea that quality of life has a role to play in economic development. And I think there's a fairly broad consensus in town, particularly amongst business people, that by using 4B money in such a way to enhance the lifestyle and the life quality and the experience of living in Kerrville, that serves to attract other people. And it's a building block process. We have, I've said it before, we've got great healthcare delivery, we've got good emergency services, a good police department, fire and EMS. We've got good basic infrastructure in the form of our streets and our water and wastewater systems. Yes, they need to be improved, but those are all basic fundamentals. Great school system. So what can we do to apply the 4B money to improve upon that building block process to attract people? And I think that attraction then serves to grow business over time, and it certainly helps to improve the experience of people that are already living here, and I think that's valid too. We've also put 4B money into infrastructure projects. 4B money went to extend water and wastewater utilities to James Avery to retain those jobs. We've also looped that system along Harper Road to facilitate future development there so that we don't have small-scale septic and well-based development that occurs like we've seen on Highway 27 between Kerrville and Ingram. Once that happens, it's very difficult to restructure and repurpose that. So we've been forward-thinking in that. So it's not, I think my opponent has talked a lot about, in my opinion and the council's opinion, 4B being just for things like the river trail. That's certainly not the case, but I think it has a role to play. We've also put money into infrastructure.
When you talk about those quality of life projects and using 4B money, And also, in light of this being a 20-year plan, we've seen some of the ways that's individually been used, the river trail, some maybe cutting improvements to parks. When you think about 20 years in vision, can you give us a glimpse of what kinds of future projects that might include?
You know, Carolina, I think I don't have a huge list of future projects. I think 4B participation in a conference center, we're still talking about another concept to attract development and investment in a conference system or a conference center, and I think 4B will have a role to play there. And again, that is a way to attract people who are already in that business, and I think bringing more visitors to town to spend their money and to enjoy being in the Hill Country in Kerrville is something that we need to continue to look at. And that's not really a 20-year piece. I think that's something we're going to continue to look in the next couple of years. But beyond that, I don't have a huge set of agenda items about what that 4B money ought to be used for. What I've done rather is to try to go out and talk to people about what risks the community might be facing and how we can apply our resources in a coordinated fashion to address those risks. So what are the risks? I think, frankly, we've done a very good job over the last 20 or 30 years of positioning ourselves as a retirement community, and that's certainly been beneficial to a certain extent. I think the offset to that, though, is that we need to try to find more business activity to support the retirement community and to facilitate kind of a subsidy on our tax rate so that we get the shift off of homeowners and onto business and commercial development. I don't have any thought that that's going to be an explosive process, but I think it's one that we need to try to work on. Realigning KEDC from the old KEDF to Kerr Economic Development Corporation with a good solid budget and professional leadership goes part of the way there, and we've had some success with Fox Tank, and I'd like to see future success. So as other stakeholders and ideas and people come to the fore with, why don't we do this or why don't we do that? I'm wanting to aggregate people to have some ideas, not really to dictate these are the 5 things that we absolutely have to do. I'm really proud of the council's relationship with the Chamber of Commerce over the last couple of years. I've told folks at the Chamber that, in my opinion, 2 years ago they were kind of disengaged from community affairs to a large extent, and I think bringing the kind of the mass of the chamber membership to the fore in terms of helping to set policy and communicate and build consensus is really important. So to the extent that those folks sometime have an idea about 4B dollars, again, that's all productive to me.
For several years now, there have been three significant developments on the site. The Gateway development, Whiskey Canyon, and the one that Chuck Coleman recently brought to the council. Questions about this. Does the city have a role in pushing any of those developments forward? And if so, what do you think it is?
I don't know that the city necessarily has a role in trying to be the final arbiter of which one of those developments is best suited for particular use. I mean, we obviously have a role to play with regard to infrastructure positioning. We have a role to play with regard to zoning. And we may have a role to play with facilitating development at one or the other of those sites, but only after an investor has come to the table and said, this is a site that I'm going to develop and I've got participation from retail or hotel or restaurant operators who want to come to town. At that point, then the city would have a role to play in working with those investors in the private sector to make that happen. But I don't believe that the city necessarily has a role to play in saying, we, the city, like this piece of property the best for this purpose, and that's the only purpose that it's ever going to serve. I mean, that's not what we do. And I think that's one of the failings of the conference center debate last year. The city had placed itself in that role of trying to be the arbiter amongst lots of different competing interests with regard to money and location and site and sizing and scope and so forth. And I said then, and I'll say it now, that was a faulty process. The process that we're undergoing now is potentially putting out a set of incentives through tax abatements and potential 4B money to say to the development community, here are some things that we would be willing to do to help you facilitate a development. Now you come to town and tell us where that development ought to go and how that should be positioned. And I think that's a defensible role.
going forward, also after this election, one of the first things the next mayor will have to do is to look at new city budget.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the different forms. We talked about the reduction in last year's budget. Do you see the next budget being cut also?
I don't see any right now. We're always going to take a very careful look at the budget, obviously, because the budget really is the defining document. It's the thing, the framework upon which everything is hung. Services delivered, people are hired or not hired, and so we have to take a very careful look at it. But I'll tell you that the rationale for making such steep cuts over the last couple of years was, number one, to get the city finances into a sustainable, long-term sustainability model. And sustainability, vision and sustainability have been two of the things that the council is really focused on as sort of guiding principles and setting policy. So we'll take a look at the budget, and to the extent certain cuts need to be made, we'll certainly take a look at making those. But my goal now is to say that we've done the hard work with regard to cutting the budget. And let's be clear, when we're talking about cutting the budget, we're talking about cutting people. There's very little cost in the budget that is not in some way predicated on somebody's job. And so that's really what we have to be clear about when we're talking about cutting the budget. We're also talking about cutting service. It's very difficult to take $1 out of the city budget and not then go and look at the impact that $1 cut makes on the delivery of service to taxpayers. So the point I'm trying to make is that I think we were very effective and decisive at getting the budget into a sustainable situation, and now we'd like to see it move in such a way, give it some time to figure out where we are, how much more money we can put to our reserve funds, where we are with regard to service delivery, and go from there. So, but to answer your question, strictly speaking, I don't see any more huge cuts coming unless we have another significant economic downturn that causes our tax revenue to go down precipitously.
Let's just talk a little bit about water and
Okay.
water availability. What steps do you think the city can or needs to take in the near future to increase water availability?
Well, the availability is unfortunately not in our control. I mean, we have permits to allow us to take water out of the river, and we exercise those permits to the extent we can. But as you know, as rainfall decreases and we go through a drought, that availability goes down. Our backstop is groundwater, and we also have very little control over the state of the aquifer. The good part is that we're really not too constrained with regard to what we can take out of the aquifer. We have permits that are healthy enough to provide for the safety and welfare of the community. And then the third leg of the stool is our ASR system. We have 2 ASR wells in full operation today, and we have a third that is underway and has been the subject of some concern with engineering and the contractor that drilled it, and that's still ongoing. So my sense is that the third ASR will come online at some point within the next year or two, and we'll begin to inject more water into the aquifer as a backstop. The other piece that we're going to need to look at is our treatment capacity. We currently are unable to treat the maximum amount of water that we can take when the river flow is good. So over time, I think we need to incrementally increase our treatment capacity. And as the treatment capacity increases, our ability to inject in the aquifer increases, and we'll have more water stored for a dry period. So I think that there's been some concern, and I would say that because of our ASR system primarily, but secondarily our groundwater resources, we're actually in pretty good shape in our water supply. The issue with regard to getting into the stages across the summer in terms of conservation has to do with demand on our wastewater. on our water treatment plant. We can only operate the treatment plant at 75 or 80% of safe operating capacity. We can't run it at the red line 24/7, so we have to throttle it back. So that's really a demand dictated issue. And we go into the stages to moderate demand. It's primarily irrigation.
What about the wastewater side? Kind of limited on how much growth we have in that area.
We are, our plant could use some improvement, and there's been talk about ultimately moving the plant to the eastern edge of the county at some point, and to get away from lift stations and so forth so that we can have gravity flow. The numbers on that are pretty daunting in terms of relocating the wastewater treatment plant. I think in the short term, what we can do is to increase the capacity of the plant incrementally, and to grow the capacity of the town to handle more water and wastewater, which again this council's done by initiating an $18 million 3-year project that would allow us to handle more water and wastewater, not only at the plant but throughout the system. We've had bottlenecks at the system with lift stations that are old and need to be repaired, and we have some lift stations that need to be created to facilitate some of the development in the areas like you've talked about on Holdsworth Drive and elsewhere. So, one thing that the council I think has been pretty wise about is going back to our capital improvement plan list, which my opponent incorrectly says that we're $105 million behind on our infrastructure development. Well, that's just not true. We are behind. And one of the reasons that we're behind is during the decade of the 90s, successive councils chose not to invest in infrastructure. So in the 10 years of the 90s, we put about $1.2 million in the ground in terms of infrastructure improvement. And since then, successive councils have had to invest taxpayer money to catch up, and we're still in that process. So, we're going to have to continue to build out the system to accommodate growth. But going back to the CIP, we've got about a $95 million list of CIP projects, and those have never been prioritized. They're basically a conglomeration of projects that successive councils have thrown at the board to say, maybe we need to do this or maybe we need to do that, but there's never been an attempt to prioritize them. This council sat down and looked at the entire list and started to prioritize those CIP projects with an eye towards what is a realistic growth rate. How much is the community really going to grow? How many people are going to come here? And how do you line up your infrastructure improvement with a realistic growth rate? And the reason for doing that is if we went in and built out, say, the whole $95 million list, number one, we can't afford to do that. Number two, even if we could, the opportunity cost would be great if our growth projections were off. In other words, if we built it and nobody came, and I guess that's what my opponent is saying, well, let's go out and throw $105 million in the ground to see what happens. Well, that's unrealistic. So the $18 million water and wastewater initiative really came from that discussion about what is our growth rate going to be, what's realistic, what can we do now, and is the project list scalable? Can we change it as time goes on based on how we're really growing?
So the current council has really taken on 3 major projects that have been on the books for a while: library, the river trail, and the city hall project. Going forward, what do you see as being the next major projects or accomplishments that the council will look at?
I think going forward, again, the water and wastewater improvement will be sort of, out of sight, out of mind in a way. I mean, we'll see work going on, but the actual impact will only be seen in the future. But I think it's very important. From a more visible standpoint, I think discussions about a conference center and what we need to do to enhance our tourism and visitor business, that conversation is going to continue. I don't have any particular sense that we'll come to a conclusion on that in any given time frame. We could have a developer come to town in the next 6 months and say, based on the incentives that you've put out, we have a deal and we can get started moving dirt right away. That may happen, or it may drag out for a while. The concept that we have in place for that, again, is to say we have a package in the form of tax abatements and other issues that may be attractive to the development community for a developer to come in and put investment capital to work to build a facility that they would operate. So that may come to pass. One of the things associated with the river trail are parks improvements at Louise Hayes Park. I think we're going to completely reconfigure the park and hopefully get more people down closer to the water and cars away from the water, and that'll be a big visible improvement in my opinion. We've got some development ideas. The development community has some ideas about the corner of Guadalupe Street and Junction Highway that remain to be fully realized. Same project out on Harper Road at the old Knights of Columbus Hall. That may come to fruition, and I hope it does. So those are some visible things that people might see in the next couple of years.
What about the zoning?
The zoning continues on. ZOIC is still meeting. The council remains supportive and patient and hopeful that we can get our zoning code rationalized in such a way that both the development community can understand what they need to do, and policymakers and city staff are relieved of the burden of having to try to arbitrate arguments and so forth. And the process is slow, but it's being led by citizens that are rolling up their sleeves and working at it, and I support that, and we'll keep plugging away. So I don't have an end date in mind. I mean, that's something that John Mosty and the other folks on that committee are working with, and I think that's a good process.
As you look back over the last 2 years and how that's gone and what your motivations were when you decided to run at that point, and compare that to this time now as you look at potentially the next couple of years, are your motivations or interests different?
No, not really. My motivations are the same, and my primary motivation is to continue to have an opportunity at a policymaking level to go out and talk to people about how they view the community going forward and what the risks are. And I want to be clear, the risks about demographics and about business growth and development, I think, are real. We've been a retirement community, and I think we can, in part, continue to be a retirement community. But one of the things that I've observed and talked to people about is that the next wave of retirees, the Generation X people born between 62 and 82, is a much smaller demographic than the baby boomers. About 30 million fewer people in that demographic. So as we start to get into that 20-year vision that we're talking about, what's our value proposition to those people? What's our value proposition to business owners that are living in the city, that are mobile and have access to capital and ideas and may have a payroll or ad valorem value that they could bring to our community? What is it that we need to do, and how should we position ourselves to attract all of those people to keep our economy growing and our society here in this community vibrant? And that's really the big issue. And so what I've been proud of is my ability to go out and talk to people about those things, to raise some awareness and to start a conversation, and then receive input, enthusiasm from various groups in town like the Chamber, who frankly have really stepped up to talk about, this is our town and we value it and we want to get involved. And I want another 2 years to keep that momentum going. So my goals and my talking points, I really don't see changing very much. The physical output of those things, the tangible things that we see, gosh, I'd like for there to be a lot of ideas about what to do and how to accomplish those. I don't have all the best ideas, and I've never said that I do. And I think the council really feels that way too. We're just trying to facilitate and to talk to people.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.